Hi there, today I'm tasting a wine from Church Road in Hawke's Bay from New Zealand. So this is their single vineyard one Chardonnay 2022 from the Tuki Vineyard. So it's a single vineyard, single varietal wine. Church Road, one of the older wineries in New Zealand. Hawke's Bay has a number of historic wineries and is a relatively mature wine producing region compared to, say, Marlborough, Martinborough and Central Otago, most of which developed since the 1970s. The winery here was founded as Taradale Winery back in 1897, and the next stage in its history is when in 1921 a young man called Tom McDonald comes to work there. He was only 14 at the time, but 5 years later was running the place and soon owned the winery. At a later stage he lost control of the winery, but still ended up running it for the McWilliams family. And McDonald had a huge reputation within Hawke's Bay and the New Zealand wine industry at the time. Some of his Cabernet Sauvignons from the 1950s and 60s are famous, and I've been fortunate enough to try some of them, and they've even 4 or 5 years ago they were still aging very well. McDonald stayed involved in winemaking in Hawke's Bay up until his death in the late 1980s. The winery today is owned by Pernod Ricard, and there's been quite a lot of French involvement in winemaking. At one stage, Cordier were involved in advising on the winemaking, Cordier from Bordeaux. As I said, today they were owned by Pernod Ricard, and so for that reason it's surprising they're not actually better distributed internationally, because they're very well known, they have a good reputation in New Zealand, but you don't see them so much elsewhere outside. They are exported, but you have to look for them. The winemaker here, Chris Scott, has been here since 2005. He's won the Winemaker of the Year of New Zealand on countless occasions and is highly respected. And I think the consistency that he's given and continuity that he's given to the winery shows in the quality of the wines and the very clear style that they have. This particular wine, the Tuki from 2022, was their top Chardonnay in that year. Normally they make a wine in tribute to Tom McDonald, the Tom, both as a Chardonnay, a Syrah and a Cabernet Merlot, but in 2022 the fruit wasn't good enough for that, so the best fruit all went into this wine from, as I say, from the Tuki Vineyard. The vintage was good and warm, but unfortunately there was quite a lot of humidity, bit of rain, and that presented the viticulturists with some difficulties. They had to do quite a lot of management of the canopy and of the bunches to deal with fungal infection. Picking went on by hand. There was careful sorting both in the vineyard and the winery. Pressing was as whole bunches so as to give slightly less cloudy juice. However, they didn't allow the wine to settle. Fermentation went on with relatively turbid, relatively cloudy juice in French oak barriques, 27% of which were new. Fermentation went on entirely with the natural yeasts that had found their way into the winery on the fruit or were already established in the winery doing fermentations. Also, malolactic conversion happened with the naturally occurring bacteria. The wines aged in barrique for 11 months with their lees, not much stirring going on, but occasionally, and then were taken out for 4 months to complete their aging in stainless steel tanks, just to allow them to meld and harmonise together. So let's see what the result is. First thing to say, the colour has a lovely vibrancy, but it's a little pale on the sort of lemony yellow scale there, not quite greenish. As I swirl it, it's not particularly viscous. The wine is 13.5% alcohol, I believe. Yes, 13.5. Let's see what the aromas are like. Gosh, there really is a sort of a flinty, struck match, sulphury derived fermentation aroma on that. In fact, it's almost sort of slightly sulphury to an off egg sort of eggy note. That doesn't sound too pleasant. It's actually it's not a problem with this. It's not overly so, but it's adding some interest to that. You've got a little bit of sort of peachy stone fruit note there. There's some toastiness. There are some lemony elements. There's a beautiful rich creaminess from the leesy notes. There's a lot going on in there. I mean, it's still young. The elements will harmonise more. But yes, there's a nice intensity, there's a lovely vibrancy to the fresh lemony notes, and there seems to be a good intensity of rich fruit. So let's see what we make of the palate. It's completely dry. It's medium bodied, it's quite rich, it's quite buttery. There's a butterscotchy note. There's a creamy texture. Again, buttery notes, melted butter. There's a lovely richness to the underlying fruit, and there's a peachiness, but also a sort of a toasty complexity over the top. You're not getting quite the obvious sulfur-derived fermentation notes that you were getting on the nose. There's none of the egginess, certainly, but that is giving it a toasty nature. But they're being overlaid by the richness of the fruit that's got some nice concentration. There's good acidity. It's not tart. Wine's undergone malolactic conversion, so that gets rid of the sort of the really green elements of the acid. But it's got a sort of a minerally steeliness that's really enlivening this. It's giving lemony notes to the back palate. There's a richness that you might almost think was alcohol, but no, at 13.5% it's not alcohol. And also taste-wise, it's not quite giving a burn. It's slightly different, but there is this rich, rounded, yogurty, creamy note. And behind that, on the back palate, I'm getting this sort of lemony, fresh acidity showing through there and just lifting those notes out of there. So I think this is a wine with, it's got lovely persistence, nice complexity, nice degree of fruit intensity. It's a young wine. It needs a little time to harmonise, but it has a lot of promise. I think that's a very high quality wine, actually. I think it's a very good example of what lovely characterful wines you can get in terms of Chardonnay from Hawke's Bay. I think they're underappreciated. They are wines that can have some lovely balance. They can have richness and freshness, and that will give them the ability to age over 5 or 6 years, I should think, at least, and gain some more complexity. So I hope you found this interesting. Thank you so much for watching. Do please leave your comments. Tell us what you think of Church Road, of Hawke's Bay Chardonnay, of our tasting videos. Do join us by signing up and following us on YouTube. But most importantly, I hope you found this interesting enough that perhaps you'll join us very soon for another video tasting. Goodbye now.